Let's cut to the chase. The platinum for the End Is Nigh is the most underrated platinum on my entire list. Made by the creators of Super Meat Boy, it's another brutally difficult indie platformer with some absurd post-game levels. It definitely isn't as well known as Super Meat Boy, and as a result, it currently has fewer than 100 platinum achievers. But I can't stress this enough, it's basically a perfect platinum experience. It's a genuinely fun game from start to end, there are no trophies that waste your time, and it's the perfect length, coming in around 30 to 40 hours. So let's take a look at my platinum experience, and maybe I'll be able to convince you to give it a shot. Alright, so as usual, we start with progressing through the main game and learning the basic mechanics. The game plays pretty similarly to Meat Boy, with a few small differences. You can't wall jump, but in its place you can hang on to corners or ledges. The game also features a bit more exploration. Almost every screen has a tumor that you need to collect, and you can find secret rooms off the main path that have mega tumors. I found that it was pretty easy to snag most of these collectibles. I'd guess that after a casual playthrough, I managed to find about 80% of them on my own.
Ooh, alright, made it. That one was tough.
The cool thing is that these collectibles will actually have a purpose once we get towards the second half of the game. We get our first trophy after making it through the first world of the game, and as you can see from our map screen here, we made pretty good progress in finding all of the collectibles throughout the world.
So it looks like I missed 3 tumors and then probably 5 big ones, and then maybe a cartridge too. Maybe that's what that big question mark is at the end.
In World 2, we run into our first major diversion off of the main path. This guy wants 50 tumors. We have a couple more to pick up, so we keep making our way through World 2 until we get enough.
There it is. Alright, now let's go turn those into the guy and see what happens.
Once we turn our tumors in, it's time to see what the future has in store for us, and it's not pretty. We have a couple of very difficult levels to get through.
Definitely tough. Ooh, wow, and I need to go fast enough to catch that spring. Wow. Okay. Can't spring too high. That was pretty good, though. Nice.
The reward at the end of all of this is a cartridge, which will be a set of retro-inspired levels that we'll eventually have to get through.
Nice. Okay, cartridge acquired. Cool. Yeah, that's tough.
But more on that later. For now, we return to the main game and continue to make it through World 2. A few more mechanics are introduced here, like these skull enemies that you can bounce on, as well as some breakable blocks. We'll get another trophy for completing the second world, and we're making good progress on finding the collectibles.
Nice, we almost 100% that world. We missed one secret.
World 3 is a dreaded water world, nobody likes those. The first few levels introduce this swimming mechanic, but things start to get a bit trickier when poison water is introduced. You can only stay in the poison water for a few seconds, so you need to find pockets of air to reset your timer. After finishing this world, we get another trophy, and I also found a cartridge from that third world, so before moving on with the main game, I decided to check out what these cartridges were all about. The first cartridge that I decided to try was the one that I found in that future level named Denial, and it turns out this was an ambitious first cartridge. Denial is one of the 4 iron cartridges, which are some of the hardest ones in the entire game. I came into this one pretty cocky, and honestly, I was pretty impressed with my ability to sight read these levels.
It shows I have 0 lives here, so I'm guessing I can't die. Or have to start over. Okay, so I'm gonna grab the right side of that block. I don't know how to do this quickly, unfortunately. Okay. Off. Okay, yes, and I just completely start over.
It was tough, but I slowly made progress through the level.
We're gonna try to ledge grab this. Yeah, I knew that was gonna happen.
As usual, nerves are probably the biggest killer here. These individual screens aren't too hard by themselves, but because you have to start over every single time you lose, there's a lot of pressure.
I don't know if I try to get over this in one jump or if I'm supposed to be ledge grabbing these. When I get off of it, that fall looks a little bit tricky. Okay. This seems like some weird grabbing shenanigans, like grabbing onto the corner. Ah, damn. Okay, not bad.
One of my main issues here was that I didn't know how to quickly get into a ledge grab, but luckily chat had my back.
Ah, shoot. Oh, it's so tough. You have to hold R2 while going off to grab a corner. Amazing. I mean, that makes it so... Okay. That's... Zach, that's a game changer.
With that knowledge in hand, I slowly got more consistent at the level, but this jump towards the very end became the bane of my existence.
Ah, man.
It's really not too tricky of a jump, but I kept mistiming it and banging my head on the ceiling too early.
So we're gonna jump off the box. Ah, man, I think the box was too high there.
The cartridge ended up taking me about an hour long just because I kept failing on this final screen. But with enough perseverance, I finally made it through these last few jumps to pick up the trophy.
Ooh, that was tough. A winner is you, indeed.
Luckily, Denial was one of the hardest cartridges in the entire game. The other cartridge that I picked up in World 3 was way easier. Over the course of the game, we'll find 9 of these types of cartridges, and for each one, you have to complete a few different objectives. Each cartridge has 10 screens, and you have 10 lives, plus 1 continue, which means you have 20 lives total to complete them. One objective is to collect all 100 rings in the cartridge, and the other tough one is to clear the cartridge without using a continue. This means that you have to beat all 10 screens without dying more than 10 times. In theory, you could complete both of these objectives in a single run, but I don't think I ever pulled that off on these initial playthroughs. This is the cartridge that I found in World 3, River City Rancid, which, as you can see, is very water-focused. My first time through the cartridge, I decided to go for all 100 rings. By the time I got to the last screen, I used my continues, and so I'm down to just a few lives.
Really do not want to game over on 99 coins on the last screen.
Even though this is a pretty short challenge and getting a game over wouldn't be the end of the world, this still felt pretty intense on this last screen.
That was close. Okay. River City Rancid. Excellent. Alright, so now we just need to beat it without a continue. That shouldn't be too bad.
So I jump back in, this time ignoring all of the rings, and eventually make it back towards the end of the level.
Back to here, 1 death to spare. See if we can do it this time.
Down to my last life, and I'm definitely getting nervous. Finishing this won't get us a trophy, but we're eventually going to have to beat all challenges on all cartridges, so it's a step that we need to take.
Hardest part is this. That jump. Whew, made it.
So we've gotten a taste of the cartridges, and at this point, I decide to head back to the main game. After World 3, there are 3 paths that we can take. I decide to go up to the Wall of Sorrow, which is a pretty vertical level. We do a lot of climbing and learn to dodge these obnoxious birds that repeatedly dive bomb you. Clearing the world gives us a trophy and lets us enter the airship SS Exodus. I definitely started to have flashbacks to the old airship levels in Splasher, but luckily these weren't nearly as difficult. The hardest part was probably trying to time these cannonball jumps perfectly, but beyond that, there wasn't anything too crazy. As we get to the end of the world, we collect this head, which is one of the 3 objects that we need to enter the end game. We also pick up yet another trophy as we head back to the fork in the road from earlier. Going down leads us to the Hollows and Golgotha. There's nothing much to note here except for maybe my least favorite screen in the entire game. These spikes, along with the chain chomps, were so hard to time. This screen will become a major pain later when I'm trying to do full game speedruns and low death runs. But we eventually got through it, and we pick up a trophy for beating each of the 2 worlds. That only leaves us with 2 more worlds, Retrograde and the Machine. The Machine is notable for being fairly non-linear. The levels double back on themselves, and you find keys that unlock doors that you've already passed. Again, nothing too crazy here, just lots of fun platforming. I'll stress that this game is a blast to play, and it's pretty quick. My first playthrough of these levels took maybe 5 hours, and I was going out of my way to pick up probably 90% of the collectibles. We get 2 more trophies for going through these 2 worlds. At this point, we enter the endgame. We now have the ability to enter the future, and incidentally, we get a trophy for doing so. The future has 4 worlds, each of which are 20 screens total, and this is really where the difficulty starts to take a step up. I'd say the levels in the future are about as difficult as some of the first few Dark Worlds in Super Meat Boy. None of them are totally absurd, but the difficulty definitely takes some time to get used to, and they're a fun challenge. On top of the difficulty, a new mechanic gets introduced. We no longer have infinite lives. The tumors that we collected in the main game are now used as our lives. Because of this, I decided to finish up collecting all the tumors from the original levels before jumping into the future for real. For me, this was probably the worst part of the platinum. Some of these tumors were pretty well hidden, and I admit that I used a collectible guide towards the end just to find the last few that I didn't come by naturally. I think for it to be a perfect platinum, I would have liked for it to have fewer tumors, but again, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big of an issue. We get a trophy once we get our 450th tumor, and it's time to tackle the future for real. The 4 worlds of the future play like harder versions of some of the original levels, and you can see that my first time through these worlds, I died hundreds of times. Luckily, if you make it through one of the worlds, your lives/tumors reset at the start of the next one. I had so many tumors at this point that I never really came close to hitting a game over, but it still took me a good amount of time to get through each of these levels. It felt like the perfect level of difficulty for a casual playthrough of the game. It was challenging, but never felt impossible. Each of these worlds also had a cartridge that I had to track down. These cartridges will be a 3rd variety, but we'll get to that eventually. For now, we made our way through these 4 different future worlds, getting a trophy at the end of each of them. There are a few notable new mechanics, mostly in the form of new enemies. World 2 featured these slimes that zoom towards you as you land on their platform. World 3 introduced these fish that will charge at you as you get closer to them. And World 4 had these ghosts that will flicker on and off. These new enemies are important because some of the more difficult cartridges will feature them pretty heavily. As we reach the end of the 4th world, we now have the option to go for the true ending by jumping into this light, or do the standard ending by going back the way we came. We eventually have to do both, so I began by doing the standard ending, which results in a classic escape sequence. We need to go back through the world that we just completed, and we have 6 minutes to do it. My favorite part here is that as your clock gets low, the entire stage and your controller will shake like crazy. They do a great job of making the countdown clock feel very real and intense. After a few attempts, I finally make it through, and we pick up a trophy for beating the game. So the main game is done, but what's the deal with the true ending? In order to get this trophy, you need to jump into the white blob and beat the final secret world. But in order to do this, we'll need to do a little bit more collectible grinding. You see, when you enter the white blob, it'll take 450 of your tumors. This means that if you only collected the tumors from the main game, you have to beat all of the last world in a single life, which would be super difficult. So the way to get more than 450 tumors is by beating the cartridges. You get 1 additional tumor for every cartridge challenge that you beat. So before going for this true ending, I went out and searched for all of the cartridges that I had missed earlier in the game. Most of these were just hidden throughout the levels, but like you saw before, some of them were these super hard iron cartridges that were found in the future. As I was finishing up collecting all of these cartridges, I got 2 more trophies. One for unlocking the Tower of Ascension, and one for unlocking the Super Mega Cart, but more on those in a second. Now that I've collected all of the cartridges, the next thing that I need to do is actually beat them. I decided to start with the iron cartridges because they were the most difficult: anger, depression, and bargaining. These cartridges are very similar to Denial, the first one that I beat. For every cartridge, you have to beat 8 or 9 very difficult screens in a row without dying. And honestly, I did a lot better on these cartridges than I expected. By now, I had enough playtime under my belt that I was pretty comfortable with the game. Each one took me maybe 15 to 20 minutes. The hardest one for me was bargaining, which had a few screens with the fish.
These levels were the toughest because it was hard to find a consistent pattern with the fish. Depending on when and where you jump into the water, the fish might be a little bit different. With the other levels, you can just memorize the exact pattern and timing that you need, but with these fish levels, you need to be able to react on the fly. As a little preview of what's to come, the Tower of Ascension is a cartridge where I need to complete all 4 of the iron cartridges on a single life. That's definitely one of the hardest challenges in the entire game, so I'll put that aside for now and come back to it later. The other set of cartridges to clear are the ones like River City Rancid, where there are a few objectives to clear. There are 9 in total, and all of them were pretty easy to get through. You get a trophy after finishing each one, so the trophies came pretty quickly here. I think the hardest one for me was cartridge number 8, named Rubble Bobble. This one had my most hated jump in the entire game. For some reason, these 3 moving platforms gave me a ton of trouble. I'm not sure what was different about them, but I just couldn't get the timing right. I cleared these cartridges and got my trophies, but just like with the Tower of Ascension, we're not quite done with these levels yet.
Alright, so got the trophy. Still have lots of work to do on that.
We'll have to come back to these levels for the Super Mega Cart. This also will be one of the hardest parts of the Platinum, so we'll put it aside for now again. Finally, the last type of cartridge are the glitch cartridges. These were found in the worlds from the future. Glitch cartridges are incredibly difficult, but luckily you have infinite lives, and you just need to get to the end. There aren't any side objectives like rings or continues to worry about. They were tough, but I slowly made progress through them and put them behind me. As a side note, on Steam, there are achievements for clearing these carts without dying, but mercifully, those achievements don't exist on PlayStation. If I had to beat these without dying, that might make this the hardest game I've ever gone for, so I'm glad I didn't have to do that for the Platinum. Just like the other ones, we got a trophy for beating each one of these cartridges, so here's a big montage of me picking up those trophies. With all of these cartridges cleared, we now have enough tumors to go for the true ending. After jumping into the white blob, we arrive in Nevermore, the final world of the game. We have a handful of tumors that we have from completing the cartridges, and we have to get through one final set of difficult levels. I loved that they added this final world, because up to this point, I didn't really have to worry about running out of lives. But now that I was starting with so few, it became a real challenge. It took me a few runs to get through the world, but I managed to snag the final cartridge of the game and get the exit for the true ending. The last cartridge was the final collectible, so I also got a trophy for finding all collectibles. This final cartridge is titled The End Is Nigh, and so you might think that this is the hardest one in the entire game, but it turns out it's about the same level of difficulty as the other glitch cartridges. It's funny, at the very start of the game, you begin by playing this cartridge, but you only have 1 life. As soon as you die, you get kicked out and start playing the real game. So this is finally your chance for redemption. You can finally make it through the cartridge.
Alright, that's it. Ooh, tough one. Okay. Now what the hell is this?
Luckily, this time through, you have as many lives as you need, and so it's not too bad. Although, on Steam, there's an achievement for beating the cartridge on that very first playthrough, so again, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that achievement here. I eventually managed to weave my way through this last screen of Bullet Hell, beat the cartridge, and pick up the trophy.
Nice. Oof, the end is nigh. Amazing. Never have to do those anymore.
With the final glitch cartridge out of the way, we're about to hit the last difficulty spike of the game. It's time to tackle the Tower of Ascension and the Super Mega Cart. As I said before, the Tower of Ascension contains all 4 iron cartridges, plus a short set of brand new screens at the very end. You only have 1 life. If you die, you're back to the very beginning. This means that you need about 10 minutes of perfect play through roughly 50 different screens. Luckily, I can report that after having done my time in the trenches with these difficult platformers, I finally learned to play smarter. I knew that bargaining, this section with the fish, was my weakest section by far. So I went there and I practiced. My goal was to complete the level 3 times in a row without dying. Once I managed to pull that off, I knew I was ready to go try the full tower. And honestly, it worked like a charm. Even though I was feeling the pressure, I was able to pretty quickly make it through the original 4 cartridges. I of course still had the occasional setback. Here I am dying towards the end of the 3rd cartridge, about 60% of the way through the entire challenge. But I persevered and finally arrived at the last section of the map. This section had a few screens centered around these flashing ghosts. I played it very, very cautiously and really planned out each of my jumps. This is the final screen of the cartridge, and my heart was pounding. Honestly, I was shocked that I got this trophy so easily. Coming into this platinum, this was the one that I was worried about most, and in total, it took me under 90 minutes of practice. That being said, the Super Mega Cart, the thing I'll talk about next, wasn't on my radar at all, and this one, for me, was far more challenging. I played this one on stream, so I'll pass it off to myself to tell you what it's all about.
And so now the last thing is Super Mega Cart, which is all of these first 10, I think? 9? All these first 9 cartridges back to back.
Just like with the other basic cartridges, we're going to need to do a couple of runs through this. One to get all 1,000 rings, and then one to beat it without using a continue, which is 10 deaths. I didn't really know which one of these I was going to go for first, but my decision was quickly made for me as I missed a ring early on.
I guess I'm going to just not go for coins on this playthrough. It's probably a good idea to remind myself what the levels look like, so I'm not even going to bother with these rings.
I was doing pretty well through these first few worlds. Up to this point, I didn't die a single time.
Yeah, last night when I was practicing this, I was trying to go for the rings from the very start, and like I said, I made it 4 of 9 carts through, and kept dying on the 5th cart, or kept getting my game over on the 5th cart, so definitely not super close.
I finally take a death in World 3, and much like many of these other games, the deaths start coming pretty quickly once I get off rhythm.
Shoot, there's 1 death already.
On this first run through, I actually make it through all 9 of the original cartridges, but then there are some final levels that I've never seen before.
Man, glad I made it. Okay. And then here are just levels that I know nothing about.
I've used all of my continues, and I only have a couple of lives left, so at this point, I'm just trying to sight read these brand new levels to see how far I can get. This first screen is definitely pretty tricky. I take some time to try to analyze the patterns here and find a gap that would be safe, but I still take a couple of deaths here and there.
We might see one of these screens.
Whew. But after getting through that one, I was pretty proud of my performance on the next few screens. The stakes are pretty low. I've died so many times that I'm not about to get an achievement, but it's still a point of pride to try to get through these last levels.
Don't know if I can just run off this. I'm gonna try it, but I might die. Okay. All right, not bad.
So I died and had to start over completely, but pretty quickly I'm back here towards the end of the level. Again, I'm skipping rings here, and I've used a continue at this point, so I'm not really close to beating this challenge yet, but just getting to the end is step number 1.
Seems like we can stand on each block. Makes this not super tough.
These last few screens have these really difficult spiky floors that you need to time perfectly. They're tough, but I had some practice from other cartridges and actually had this timing down pretty well, so I got through it fairly easily.
Okay. Last little dude. All right, cleared the cartridge. Nice trophy, Super Mega Cart. So, obviously still lots of work to go on that cart, but good progress.
A few more trophies popped here, which was a nice surprise.
Retro Rampage. It's probably every cartridge. Nice. All right, so 2 more. Oh, and there we go. Beat it. Beat the full game and all the carts. Nice. Yes, so now we have just these final 2 achievements on this cart. So beat the cart without continuing, so in only 10 lives. And then also a run where we have to get all 1,000 rings, but we can do so in using 30 deaths. So we're getting close.
The next day, I decided to jump back into it, and I wanted to start with the no continue run. Thought this was slightly easier than the 1,000 coins run. There's not a ton to show here except for a lot of practice, especially on the later levels. Remember this screen? This is the one that killed me so many times. So many different runs ended here. I eventually make it back to the last couple of screens, and I'll let the rest play out. This one isn't too bad, but only because I'm not picking up all of the rings. It's going to be really tough in the next run. Although I will admit, this drop can be kind of terrifying. There's very little room for error between grabbing the ledge and falling into the lava.
I have 1 death to spare, and this room's pretty easy, but my dreaded spiky floor rooms are coming up. There are 2 more very hard rooms that I have to get through, and I only have 1 death to do it with. There's that death. I feel like my heart rate probably shot way up in that moment. I feel super lucky to have made it through that room. That big jump at the end over the ledge was totally improv. I had no idea if I was going to make it or not. But luckily I finish it with 0 lives to spare. That's 1 achievement down and 1 more to go. Alright, so for the 1000 ring challenge, we have a lot more lives to play with, but there's a lot more that we have to do. Collecting every ring means that the run is about twice as long. A few notable rooms, this one in particular is awful. I have no idea how anyone could possibly get all of the rings in this room without dying once. I never really figured this one out. I was lucky to get out of this room without spending more than 3 or 4 lives. This room is also annoying because of the ring in the very top right corner. If you don't hit this final jump perfectly, you're not going to get enough height to pick up the ring. So a lot of times I would miss it and have to start the room over again. Alright, so I've made it back to this room, and again I have 1 life to spare, but this time through I obviously need to pick up every ring, so it's going to be a big challenge. I take a death, and things are definitely more dire than they were in my previous run. I have 4 rooms to get through now. This last ring is just taunting me. I'm playing it super safe. I'm going to ledge grab to make this final jump a little bit easier. Again, this room isn't too bad, nothing too hard here, even with having to get all of the rings. The secret to this spike timing is to not go too fast. Every instinct tells you that you should jump as soon as possible, but that's actually wrong. You need to wait a split second when you land and then jump again. As I get into the last room, my focus on getting the timing for this first jump is hilarious. I look at this for so long. Now just make sure not to die to the little skull guy, and the trophy is ours. This was definitely the hardest part of the entire platinum, but overall it wasn't too absurd. There are things in Super Meat Boy that were way harder than this. But we actually aren't done quite yet. We have 2 more trophies to pick up, and they both involve full game runs. We need to beat the game in under 90 minutes, and we also need to beat the game with less than 200 deaths. Again, I had some flashbacks to Splasher here as I began working through these runs, but to my surprise, they really weren't a huge issue. For both of these trophies, you have a lot of wiggle room. I began by setting a benchmark. I did a complete run without any practice and ended up with 841 deaths in over 3 hours, so I had a good amount of time to shave off. I knew that my weakest areas were the future worlds. Those were by far the hardest, and so I figured I needed to get more familiar with each of them. I wanted to get to the point where I could beat each world with about 20 deaths. Once I hit that goal, I went back for another full run. It's funny, while you're in a run, there's no way to see your death total without backing out to the main menu, so for the most part, you're doing the run completely blind. You don't have a good sense of how close you are to the 200 death limit. I actually think this makes the whole run a lot easier because the nerves just aren't there. You're just playing through the game. This run ended up being super close. I actually get the trophy for beating the run in under 90 minutes, but I had a few too many deaths. I ended up with 237. Luckily, I knew exactly where I could shave off a few more deaths. I had died so many times on this horrible screen. I'd never bothered to learn the pattern to get through it. So I went back to the screen, learned a safe route through it, and on my next full game playthrough, I easily beat the 200 life limit. Here I am finishing the run, picking up the final trophy, and getting the platinum. It was a great run with only 126 deaths in just over an hour. Like I said at the start of the video, the End Is Nigh really blew me away. If you're interested in a platformer that has a hard but not insane platinum trophy, this is a must play.
I'll be working on Hollow Knight next, so subscribe to follow along for more difficult platinums. Thanks!